Hi everyone. Welcome to my talk on the topic of inclusive and culturally adaptive comprehensive sexuality education. My name is Rehma, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a fourth-year psychology student at the University of Alberta. I'm very excited to share some of the advocacy work that I have had the opportunity to do over the course of this past year around inclusive and comprehensive sex ed, along with my team at the Canadian Advisory of Women Immigrants. Just going to quickly. If you are wondering what CAWI, or the Canadian Advisory of Women Immigrants, is, we are a community organization in Canada with the mission to empower women immigrants in all aspects of life through advocacy efforts, including healthcare, employment, social networking, and educational opportunities. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am located on Treaty 6 territory and respect the histories, language, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. So before I begin, just about the SDGs that I'm focusing on today are SDG 4, which is ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education to promote lifelong opportunities for all, and also Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. A little bit of background on my project. So some of the issues that we found before we began our project was that immigrant women are among those marginalized groups who continue to face health inequities due to changes in the healthcare system's priorities and capacity concerns. A key area where women are impacted tends to be a lack of culturally sensitive and comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education. There are various barriers that exist for women, such as cultural differences, stigma, languages, as well as medical discrimination against ethnic minorities. This restricted access further impacts women's desire to access SRH education, which leads to gaps in knowledge around periods, pregnancies, and many other topics that are considered taboo even today. After seeing the restricted access that immigrant women have for SRH, I'm now working alongside my team at CAWI to conduct a community-based research project which is focused on the experiences that immigrant women and girls across Canada have had with traditional SRH curriculums. The need for culturally sensitive SRH education and resources prompted us to conduct this ethically approved community-based research project which was focused on the experiences of immigrant women, girls, and gender diverse individuals across Canada. As part of our SRH campaign this past year, we've done some pretty amazing things. We've led various panel discussions where community organizations, researchers, and individuals from the wider community contributed their expertise and knowledge to the discussion of SRH and SRH education pertaining to immigrant women, girls, and gender diverse individuals. So this is a timeline of what our project looked like over this past year. In terms of the timeline, we began our project in February 2022 last year when we started our research project and began conducting focus group discussions to better understand barriers and gaps in current SRH curriculums. By May 2022, we had finished conducting our focus group discussions and moved on to formulating our paper after identifying common themes and barriers that immigrant women have experienced when accessing SRH resources and services. During the summer months, we began our work on structuring our curriculum and best strategies to use. And by October and November 2022, we were starting our community consultations and receiving feedback from community organizations on where we could improve our curriculum and changes that we could make to make it more accessible and more clear, cohesive for anyone who wants to access it. As we approach February, we are now in the process of completion as we move towards publishing this toolkit and curriculum that will be accessible to everyone. So I'm just going to go a little bit in depth in terms of what we were able to achieve with our campaign in this past year. To begin, I wanted to start off my presentation by presenting the research CAWI has done, as we are currently working on publishing our findings. Our mission was to build a toolkit which allows more inclusive and especially more culturally aware sexual health education for women, girls, and gender diverse folks. In order to do so, we conducted 3 focus group discussions starting from February last year, and these went up to April, as well as comprehensive literature reviews. Our focus group discussions had around 4 to 10 people each who identified as immigrants or refugees to Canada. We did so in better to understand their lived experiences and to guide the tools we would need to better meet the needs immigrant women, girls, and folks have who experience stigma or shame when it comes to learning more about sexual and reproductive health. Following our research project, we conducted 2 workshops. Our first workshop was focused on navigating relationships for immigrant women. And in this workshop, we talked about a lot of interesting topics. Some of them included aspects of healthy relationships, understanding that what works well for others might not necessarily work for you. We also talked about addressing religious and cultural differences in relationships, and also how one can talk to their families about their relationships. Our second workshop was focused on the basics of sexual and reproductive health. These addressed topics such as HIV, AIDS, STIs, periods, period pain, period poverty, as well as societal stigma, and many others. So alongside our workshops, some of the final stuff that we were doing, and this was taking place in November and October, we started conducting community consultations with organizations across Canada, and we are so grateful for the support that they have given us. These organizations include CCAN, Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights, and many others who gave us amazing insight into how we could make our curriculum even better. So, using the feedback and insight that we received, we structured our toolkit and curriculum in a way that was accessible and clear for anyone who wanted to access it. We conducted a community consultation event last month, and we also invited individuals across Canada who were interested in sort of contributing their ideas or perspectives in this project. As we continue our consultations and workshop, our team is now continuing to develop our curriculum and toolkit project to address important topics that will be incorporated into SRH education. So I touched a little bit on our research project that was assessing the experiences that immigrant women and girls had with traditional sexual and reproductive health curriculums. I'm just going to share briefly what some of our findings were. So the aim of the study basically was to identify barriers and gaps that were faced by women, girls, and gender non-binary people who are immigrants to Canada while accessing sexual education. We also looked at how cultural and religious differences intersect with their immigrant identity to define their SRH educational needs. Lastly, we also observed how our current mainstream curriculum may impact immigrant populations in the country. There were three main recurring themes that we discovered when analyzing our data. And those were, as you can see, barriers to accessing SRH services, limitations of current SRH education, and barriers for facilitators who want to teach SRH education and give more community support. So some of our findings indicate that the biggest barriers to accessing SRH services today are stigma and cultural barriers. In terms of limitations to current SRH education, we discovered that lack of diversity and inclusion, and also SRH being connected to overall well-being, are some of the biggest barriers out there for immigrant women and girls. Lastly, for facilitators and educators, we found that there is a strong need for safe spaces and resources, and also moving beyond cookie-cutter approaches where we avoid using a one-size-fits-all approach. So lastly, what are we doing to translate this knowledge? And I'm really excited to share this because we're very close to sharing our toolkit and curriculum. So in order to share and translate some of the information that we have discovered, we are in the process of currently finishing our toolkit and curriculum and hope to release it by next week. This will be an open and accessible source to everyone, and it will be shared in our website and other social medias. So this is currently the overview of what it looks like, and we are looking forward to sharing this curriculum and toolkit, which will contain a section for facilitators, educators, and teachers, and then sections containing 6 lesson plans which educators can use if they feel they don't have enough institutional support from schools or universities. The first part of the curriculum includes various different sections for facilitators, educators, and teachers on what are important things to consider in your role as a teacher, such as the importance of anti-oppressive teaching, cultural sensitivity and humility, inclusive language, trauma-informed approach, accessibility and inclusion, and many others. The second part of our toolkit includes 6 lesson plans, and these are basics of sexual and reproductive health, navigating relationships, LGBTQ2+ and queer communities, consent and boundaries, anti-oppression and anti-racism in SRH, and lastly, creating safe spaces. I'm very excited to share that we will be publishing our toolkit on February 13th, and this will be a resource that will be accessible for anyone who would like to use it. So yeah, that being said, thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope that you were all able to learn something new. And thank you to SDGA for giving me the opportunity to share some of the work that I've been able to do over this past year. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone.